will get that started. Okay, I believe it is recording. So again, welcome. I'm Noah Cohan. I'm the Assistant Director of American Culture Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, and we're excited to host this event for you. Most of you are graduate students at WashU, I think, although others are welcome, and we're glad you're here. Abram Van Engen gets all the credit for thinking up this event and setting it in motion before his own personal motion led him to break his elbow. And I sort of grabbed the baton and gave him some more time to recuperate to get this event going. So Abram is the spiritual head, and please, as I said before, Abram, feel free to jump in at any point. For now, what I thought we would do is introduce our panelists and then give them a chance to share any opening thoughts they might have with us. But from there, mostly this event is to serve the graduate students, for you to ask questions, for you to talk about maybe what experiences you've had in trying to write for a broader audience and pitching to publication. So this event is for you, and hopefully a lot of the talking will be done by you in tandem with our panelists. Okay, again, since I don't think I said it off the top, the name of the panel is Pitching for Publication, Translating Your Academic Expertise for a Popular Audience. And I will briefly introduce the panelists. First is Sarah Mesle, Assistant Professor of Writing at the University of Southern California. She is the editor-at-large of the Los Angeles Review of Books, where she also writes for the Dear Television column. She is co-founder and editor of the LARB channel Avidly, and with Sarah Blackwood, the co-editor of the NYU short book series Avidly Reads. A 19th centuryist by training, she is interested generally in the long history of popular culture, from the rise of the sentimental bestseller to today. Her celebrity profiles have appeared in magazines like InStyle, Self, and Goop. Next, we have Rebecca Onion. She lives in Athens, Ohio, and writes about culture, history, and childhood for magazines, newspapers, and the internet. She is currently a staff writer for Slate.com. She holds a PhD in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin, and it was always a pleasure to run into her at ASA conventions in past years. Her book, Innocent Experiments, Childhood and the Culture of Public Science in the United States, was published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2016. Last but certainly not least, we have Phil Maciak, the TV editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books. He is also the author of a book about religion and early cinema called The Disappearing Christ, Secularism in the Silent Era, which came out from Columbia University Press in 2019. His film, television, and literary criticism has appeared in Slate, Film Quarterly, J19, PMLA, The New Republic, and other venues. He is also the co-founder with others at LARB of the Dear Television column. He teaches in the English department and the American Culture Studies program at Washington University in St. Louis. Welcome to you all.
Thanks.
All right, so as I said, I thought we might start with just some opening remarks from each of you on your careers as writers beyond just writers in an academic setting, which you all have done as well. Just a couple of prompts that you might use to get those remarks going, since I don't think I prepped you on giving remarks. So one thing you might comment on is, when you start writing, do you think of it in terms of pitching it to a particular readership? If so, what are the different readerships you imagine? Does your non-scholarly writing flow from the same basic register or voice as the scholarly one? Or do you think of them as distinct modalities? And what advice would you give someone looking to place their writing in what we might consider a popular press publication? Would anyone like to start?
How about we go in the order of introduction?
Sure.
I nominate Sarah.
Thank you, Abram. Thank you all for having me. I'm so glad to be here. And I want to say to all of you grad students that Abram and I know each other from graduate school. Phil, I actually met at the, I think first paper I gave as a graduate student. We were on a panel together. Rebecca, I'm so glad to meet you. Phil? Yeah, no, really?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was like, so, Rebecca, I'm so excited to meet you. So, but I wanted to say to all of you students at WashU, just like that you just have these great people, and I'm so happy that you get to spend time with people who are so just community minded, like really good folks. And to say that this is a demonstration of how, and I do think this connects to the pitch question, how much the relationships that you make with each other at this time in your life have the potential to be really sustaining for your growth as a human being, let alone a writer. So, and that's certainly the case for me because most of my public writing has developed out of my friendship with Sarah Blackwood and trying to make ways to talk about the stuff that we like to talk about with each other. I thought a little bit about what I wanted to say, so maybe Noah, this answers some of your questions, but I'll just raise a couple of things first. First, when it comes to pitching, I think some of the basics are fairly straightforward and you can find them on the internet, like put pitch in the subject line, be clear and to the point, say what you want to talk about, why it's important and why you're good at talking about it. Lots of soothing white space. Like that's the main thing that I would encourage all of you to say, or that it's common knowledge. So I'll just add my own thoughts to that, which is that when I'm looking at a pitch, and I have looked at pitches, I think from several of you, which is a real pleasure. One of the main differences I think that you should be thinking about between writing an abstract, for instance, for a conference versus a pitch for a publication is that I'm interested as an editor in whether or not you're correct. But mostly what I need to know from this pitch is what it will be like to read your writing about it. So your pitch needs to be in the voice of what you will say. And it needs to have a clear sense of who your reader will be, the more and why they would be interested in listening, spending time with you. So this, I would say, is the keenest modality difference, to use Noah's term. When you are creating scholarship, your aim is to add to the human race's knowledge of the universe in which we exist, right? So if you are correct, then that's going to be vetted on its correctness. And then people are like, okay, I need to pay attention because this is correct. At no other time in your life will you have that same mandate, right? And any other time it's like, you're sending me my pitch, I'm reading it right here. Like, this is my apartment. I was just telling Noah, my washing machine doesn't work right now. I'm like having some problems. And so it's like, how does your thing meet me in my day and give me a meaningful encounter with your words? So I guess that I would say that you really need to remember that there is a real person on the other end of this machine who is meeting your words, and you should picture them. A piece of advice that I often give is from that old show, Project Runway, which I don't know if you all remember, but which is great. And a thing that the judges often used to say to the designers is, who's your girl? Where's she going? Like, that's a great dress, but who's going to wear it? Where are they going? And I would say the same thing for your writing. Like, who is your writer? Who's your girl? Where's she going? Is she on her phone? Does she have time? Is she reading on her bed? And I say girl because that's like that's the person I always want to be writing to, like my girlfriends. But it doesn't, like, who's your dude? So those are some things that I would want to say, and I have a lot more that I can embellish on that. But the things that I want to say mostly is inhabit your writing. Write it in voice, and in a voice that matches who you are and the imagined readership of the venue that you're pitching, and that's going to switch around. You have lots of voices. Figure out which one is the one that can speak most inhabited with clarity on on this particular topic. And remember that it's a real person. So like, you want to be like making the writing meaningful for them. And that what writing is going to be meaningful for a reader will vary from venue to venue. So be holding that in mind. So I can extrapolate more on all of that, but those are the things that I will say at this point. And then really the thing about the soothing white space, like lots of in the pitch, like just so much whiteness, so comfortable. Yeah. Resumes too. That was a very, yeah, okay.
Thank you so much.
Um,
Rebecca?
Sure. Yeah, it's a broad set of questions, so I'll try to be as specific as possible. So I mean, it's a little hard for me to answer the question of audience now, because now that I'm a staff writer, I just write for Slate like continuously. And so now I find it almost hard to get outside of that register a little bit. But I will say that from my experience being on staff there, like it's and from my experience freelancing before, I did a bunch of freelancing before I was on staff, and then also before I went to graduate school. I feel like the most important thing in some ways is to be well read with the publication that you are pitching to have a sense that, I mean, and it's hard because it always sounded like a huge burden to me when I was a freelancer, because it meant that everything that I read felt like it had to be in service in some way of my pitching, because I felt like I needed to be up on like every publication. So there's ways that it can sound onerous, but it just means, I just mean to say that like a pitch, if we get a pitch for Slate that we think will work for Slate, it often feels like the person has been reading us for years and kind of knows what, not only just like, oh, we haven't covered that yet, and therefore there's a place for it here, but also just the level of specificity and detail in the story, like the size of the story, basically, that would be appropriate for us. Because there's all different kinds of sizes of stories, which is why events like this always kind of freak me out a little bit, because I'm like, wait, what do you mean like pitch you're writing to a non-academic publication? Like it could be anything. It's so many different ways of writing. But for a place like Slate, like quite often it's like an argumentative, like what you might call a hot take, but hopefully we're a little better than that. But something that's like a little bit to the side of conventional wisdom, something that's a little bit argumentative, funny, has like a certain vibe and voice to it. And so if we get like a bunch of pitches for like long features, like sometimes that ends up being something that we'll do, but sometimes it feels like that's not something we have resources to really support, like to pay a bunch of money to help someone write. So it's not like sized to us, if that makes sense. And then another major thing that I wanted to say about like pitching academic work to non-academic places, which again, like I'm so far out of, I guess the last time my last academic work came out, like a long-awaited anthology that I had submitted something for in 2014. I finally got the copy of the book in my hands like earlier this year as like the last academic work I'll maybe ever do. So that stuff is kind of like behind me now, but I will say that when reviewing pitches, I sometimes do some editing for Slate history pieces, and when I get pitches from historians, a lot of times I can feel that they are trying not to be too specific because they feel like the like quote unquote general audience won't want to know like too much, like that like they've been sort of like beaten down into not like flooding people with all the information that they've acquired over the years, which I actually feel like in some ways like the historians who pitch me are too broad in some way. Like they'll try to make kind of connections that are super broad, and I know it's supported in the back of their mind with all the evidence that they have from their like years in the archive and reading all the historiography, but it comes out like kind of vague in a weird way. And to me, the great thing about being an academic who's trying to pitch writing to a general publication is that you you have all the research, we're just like out here staff writers trying to write, like I have to turn in 2 pieces a week, and a lot of times I can't do all that research anymore. Like in graduate school I could, and I learned a lot and acquired a lot of knowledge then, but now the resource of time is not as accessible to me to do all of the reading that I would want to do to try to inform things. And you guys are the ones who, have been doing this deep reading, again, in the literature and then in the archives, and that's like in some ways like your advantage. So again, you want to figure out a way to try to size the pitch to the publication and not do like a flood with specifics. But really, I feel like your one of your major bonuses as writers is that you like did the research, whereas like a lot of people don't have really the time to do who are writing for the internet. Okay, that's it for now. I hope we talk about money at some point. Okay, bye.
I hope we do too. I was planning on it if no one else brought it up. Phil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about money too, but I want to just first of all, thanks for having me and putting me in a panel with two writers that I like so much. But also, I want to amplify what I was planning on saying is going to amplify a lot of what has already been said before me. But I'll say this as kind of a general umbrella and thinking about how I started doing this kind of writing in graduate school. Is through sort of prioritizing conversational writing. And I mean that in both the way that it is like the derogatory term that your advisors say to you about things that you're writing, that it's too conversational, which I write very conversationally and I am in favor of it. And, you know, that's the way it is. But also thinking about conversationality as a kind of, like an ethic of your writing. And I think this is true of scholarship too. This was advice that was given to me when I was in grad school about writing scholarship, is that you don't want to, you writing an academic article isn't just about like flaunting expertise or research or, like putting the mouse at the door or something. It's about having a conversation with other scholars, and that's what citation is. And that's what you hope happens when you write a piece of academic scholarship. And I think the same is really true, not necessarily even more so, but just equally true of public writing. It's just maybe more obvious that it's true when you're writing in public. So I think to that extent, it's important to read with other people. I try to cite a lot in my public writing, not footnote citations, but referring to other writers. Hyperlinking is very easy on the internet. And I try, at least in sort of when I write things, to sort of try to be in conversation, to not sort of imagine that you're always starting the conversation, but that you're sort of building out or thinking with or doing things like that. And, different venues will have different style guides with that kind of stuff, and that can get worked out in transition. But I think it's a good place to start, to imagine that you're not just dropping an argument, you are entering a conversation. And to that extent, we can talk about style and communication, but I think what Sarah said about imagining your reader is really important. And it's really important too, going off of what Rebecca said, to imagine your reader in the form of the venue that you're pitching. That does mean knowing what their house style is. It means knowing if they've covered something or not. I get a surprising number of pitches for articles or reviews of things that we've already covered, or that like how, it's a very easy thing to do that can allow you to not sort of step into a hole. Imagine the reader in terms of the venue, about what kind of conversation they have, and so you can kind of show the way that your ideas fit into their, what they do. And I think that part of that is about having an idea. And this is kind of, this I think jives with what Sarah said about the pitch being a place to showcase your writing. I think it's also a place to showcase your thinking. I like reading pitches from writers where I enjoy thinking with them through a topic. And that means, allowing yourself to kind of work through something a little bit in a pitch, show them the way that you think. And again, not for nothing, this is also something that I think is true about academic writing and abstract writing, right? But you want to show them that not only are you going to write in a way that they like, but that you're going to say things and maybe even surprise them in ways that they hadn't imagined. And I think it's worth, I can give more specific like do's and don'ts type of advice if people want that later, or if that's of interest. But a very common don't, at least for me, specifically from scholars, and I'm not just talking about graduate students, I'm talking about people at all little levels of the hierarchy, is getting a pitch that is essentially, pop cultural text theorist. So the pitch is like, what if Lacan meets Queen's Gambit or something like that. And maybe that's interesting. It's not interesting to me, but the format of that conversation is a format that is, it's a struggle to sort of see as an article. And I work at LARB. That's where I do all of my my pitch farming, and we're, I think, much more open to stuff like that than somewhere like Slate or New Republic or anywhere else is. But still, even so, when we do publish pieces that have that kind of like, here's this theoretical paradigm running into this pop cultural text, or even novel or whatever, it's not really about just the juxtaposition of those two things. It's about what you're going to do with that. So, I mean, it might be that might be the way that you describe your work to yourself, right? That this is a Marxian analysis of X, Y, or Z thing. But the thing that's going to be interesting to editors is what you're doing with that, right? Not that that's what you're doing, right? Not that that's the premise for what you're doing, but what kind of argument does that let you make, right? And invariably, the argument that lets you make is going to be much, much more interesting to an editor or someone reading pitches than the concept that you're sort of taking this theoretical paradigm and adding it to this other thing. And I think that goes along with one more thing I'll say before I stop, is just that I think that there's a model of like public intellectual communication that prioritizes you as the expert, right? The appeal of this article, the appeal of this essay that I'm going to write is that I am an expert in this topic and I'm going to tell you what I know about it, right? And that's important, right? And it's good to be an expert, but that alone is not the pitch, right? The pitch is what you do with that expertise. The pitch is what that expertise allows you to see that other people can't see, or that you see differently, right? The sort of ground staking of expertise that we might associate with like punditry, I guess, is something that is a part of translating academic work, but it's not the main thing, right? I think people want to see your mind working. People want to see your writing working. And the more that you can prioritize that kind of dialogue, and not just sort of credentializing or sort of laying out what you can do, or what perspective you can provide on a particular trend is I think the way to go generally. That's what I have for now.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Those are great places to start. My hope, as I said off the top, is to now let those of you who are interested in this topic and have budding writing careers ahead of you to ask questions or just comment. Maybe you're a fan of the work of some of the people on our panel. So I'll turn it over to you. If you do have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself, tell us your name and what graduate program you're in, and maybe what you're working on if you're at the dissertating stage.
Right before we begin that, could I jump in with a question? Because I think that one thing I'd love to hear from each of you, and I'm sorry to take the prerogative and jump in like this, but then I'll shut up, I promise. But one thing I'd love to hear is, since so much of our audience is in graduate school, is at the beginning of this, is doing this for the first time, as Noah just said, the writing careers are mostly ahead of them. I'm sort of curious if you could each give us a little bit of a background story about what was the first experience like for you? When did you begin? Where did you pitch first? How did it go? Did you have a ton of rejections before you got rolling? What was it like for you to begin, and how and where and when did you begin to get where you are now? I should call on people. Let's go in the backwards order from last time. So we'll do Phil, Rebecca, and then Sarah.
So I suspect this is going to be a theme, but I feel like I started doing this writing in a vastly different media environment than the one that we currently occupy. And the way you know that is that my first pitch that I thought was going to work out really well was for a contest that I entered at McSweeney's.com. They ran for a while a column contest. And it was like you pitch a column to them and you get to write it like 6 times a year or something. And I was ABD, or I'd just gone ABD, and I was having a hard time writing my dissertation or like getting into the flow of it. And I thought, maybe if I could write, to to somebody else, right? If I could write outside of this, it would help me a little bit. So I wrote this thing for the column contest and obviously didn't get picked. But then I saw an open call for Slant magazine, which notably is not Slate magazine, but Slant magazine, which is just kind of like a reviews website. For like an open call for writers to review things. So I sent the thing I wrote for the column contest to them, and I started writing, and this was at that time for free. I started writing just reviews, TV reviews. They'd send me screeners, and it was really cool that I got screeners, and they were on DVD and stuff. And I wrote for them. I wrote for like a year, and I just I would write every 2 weeks or so, like a 1,000-word review of a new TV show. And I learned a lot working with an editor, and I think that was the thing. That's the thing that I think is if you're on the fence about whether or not to do this at all, I think the argument in favor of this, even if you only do it once, is getting to work with a real editor at a publication who is interested in working with you stylistically, who's interested in working with you structurally, and isn't just like vetting your ideas. Having been edited by Sarah Mesle alone is, I've added years on the end of my life. But I started doing that, and then I met some friends. I met Jane Hu and Lily Lifbro and Evan Kinley, and I started the blog with them, and we started writing together, and that just spiraled out. And I was very interested from the very beginning in pitching places. I wanted to like write for Slate, and I wanted to write for New Republic and that stuff, and I did that, and I'm hit or miss, or was hit or miss at that time, and still remain hit or miss. But I worked on that stuff like as I went, and tried to get advice from other people. But I think the thing that helped me pitching after that initial experience, and helped me writing too, was just having editors read me and tell me what I needed to do, and help me to turn the stuff I wanted to say into readable, internet prose. And I think that having that relationship with an editor really got me a long way.
Okay, it's me, right? Yep, like talk about a completely different landscape that I launched into with this. So I started out, I graduated college in 2000, and I started out my first jobs when I moved to New York were at a teen magazine. So I worked at YM, which was a teen magazine that doesn't exist anymore, for 3.5 years or something. And so that was really the first relationships that I had, because I didn't do any freelancing before that. I started there as basically a sort of a glorified executive assistant. Like I was the assistant to the editor-in-chief as like a 23-year-old, like some Devil Wears Prada stuff going on there, where they're like trying to dress me for the role and stuff. I was resisting. But so that was where I really learned how to talk to editors, because it's a teen magazine, but there's still like an infrastructure of an editorial staff there, and people picking stories for different reasons and trying to get an editorial mix going and get it have a direction of the magazine and all of that. And so I worked in the features department after I left the job as the executive assistant, and that was where I really sort of learned how to frame pieces to be the right size for the job, and submit copy and do all the whole editing process. And honestly, it was probably a lot rougher of an editing process then than it is now for me, because editing, people who are editing for the internet, Slate does more editing than some places, I think, but they still, I will submit something and it'll be up within 2 hours after I submit it, depending on the thing. But a lot of times, it's pretty quick. But at YM, it was you submit it, and then there was 3 different editors reading it, and the classic women's magazine over editing situation occurred to me. Anyway, so that was sort of where I was first pitching, was to the people who were my my editors there. And then when I freelanced for about a year between doing that and going to grad school, and that's the first time I ever cold pitched anyone. But luckily I sort of had a little bit of experience from the YM days, and I used some of my connections with the editors there to pitch to some other service, kind of women's service magazine stuff. And then I cold pitched the places that I really wanted to write for, which were like, you know, like the New Republican slate, like exactly like Phil. So, but at that time I didn't really know what I wanted to be writing about, which was part of the reason why I went back to grad school, because I just was like, I don't even know what my topic is. Like, what's, you know, am I just like a generally interested in the world kind of person? Sometimes I still think I'm that way, but yeah, so I learned a lot through trying to think through what my actual interest in the world was by writing these pitches. I found a couple editors during that time that were willing to publish me and hear new pitches from me and go back and forth with me about it. But that was really sort of the intro to it. And then I went to grad school and everything changed. But I'd say that's probably the start.
So yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that I would say is like the world is just so different than it was when I first started doing this in 2012, you know, 12, or before that. The world is different in every way, and in some ways it is not as it has a lot of disasters in it that I choose to see as possibilities, right? Like, let's make it, right? And I guess that is one thing that I would say, although it is not an answer to the question of how I started this. I didn't really do any pitching in graduate school at all. I had like a baby blog because it was the great age of blogging and I had a baby. Which was helpful to me in terms of figuring out what people like to read or would comment on, actually. So that was not it's still, I think, available. You could go read about my early days of motherhood. So I had that. And then I started when I was here in Los Angeles as a postdoc, and realizing that it was going to be more important to me to stay in Los Angeles than to get the kind of academic job that I thought I had wanted for various reasons. I just really fell in love with LA and I didn't want to leave. So I was like, okay, well, I'm good at stories. This is hot. I don't know, people here seem to like stories. Should I do some of these stories? So I kind of started making my own blog that was just talking about adaptations of the Hunger Games and stuff like that. And there's a couple of things that sort of line up. I mean, one thing to say is that Sarah Blackwood and I started Avidly because I was like, I really want to write something about this Adam Lambert, who you may know is like American Idol winner and like Twilight and Foucault, you know, and I was like, where's the place? There's no place. And we're like, well, let's make a place, right? So we made a place, and it was a moment where you could make a place and things could kind of start. And one of those things that was also being made at that time was the Los Angeles Review of Books. So the first thing I ever really pitched was a piece to LARB about young adult fiction, which at that time, because of my interest in popular culture, it was really the thing I was thinking about. I had a good connection through a friend of mine from college to the YA editor, and she really helped me write a pitch that was like, this is, everyone's writing about YA, this is why I have something that's different. And that is an interesting story for me. I still feel good about that essay, although I was in a different place with my feminism then than I was now. But I was writing this thing for the Los Angeles Review of Books. I was, you know, it was about all of this YA literature that I had read. I was really I was like, nobody's going to read this. How am I going to get people to read this? And so I kind of had this polemic title and opening. And then all of YA internet read it. And although I thought it was very clear by virtue of the fact that I was mentioning like the 45 YA novels that I had read and thought about that I really cared about YA, it switched context. And this is something you should know that can happen in the internet. You like write something that's like, I'm writing for this little niche piece over here on the this blog, and then it picks up and it travels into a place where there's a different set of expectations and things read very differently. So this piece that I wrote that was all about how I love YA literature, and it was a critique of culture, got taken up by the YA literature as a critique of YA literature. And for like 5 days, I was hiding under my desk where like, and like Andrew Sullivan was like, isn't she a great conservative critic? And I was like, no, I'm like, it was like a real, I mean, it was really wild. So, and that was the first thing I wrote for the internet. And I was like, huh? Like that's really, except for my baby blog. So that was a real trial by fire experience. Yeah. But it kind of gave me like, it was interesting, right? And then it kind of did move into a platform in different ways. And I guess the one thing that I would say about that is that it is very unpredictable how things can move. And I think when you write about things that you care about and that other people care about, if you can find a place to meet there, avenues open up in strange, unpredictable ways. And so, like I happened to write this thing, and then like because of that, I like all the LARB staff knew me because it like was like this huge event. It was like the best thing read because like everyone was yelling at me on the internet. So there was like, then they were really happy because there were all these clicks. So then I knew it, and then I got to be friends with Evan, and then I got like went on board at LARB, and then I was like, yeah, I want to come on board, but Phil, you have to let me write about Game of Thrones. And then I wrote about Game of Thrones, and then like the features editor at InStyle liked what I wrote about Game of Thrones and was like, do you want to interview Brie Larson? And I was like, I do, so like literally that is the trajectory from like writing about like a little niche scene in Uncle Tom's Cabin and how it connects to a David Levithan YA novel, so it like, you can't really predict, you have to kind of stay with it and write stuff that really is worth it to you to say, I guess.
I think that last point is really important because exactly as you say, you don't know where it's going to go and who's going to read it. So if it ends up if you end up saying something you don't really believe in, but just trying to get published, then you'll end up having to defend it to very odd crowds. I mean, I haven't done nearly as much writing as the panelists, but I have written a few things, and it's been odd to see where they have gone or where they have shown up. Or like I critique somebody and it turns out that somebody reads it and responds. And so, a lot of people have Google alerts on their names. So if you write about them, they will find out in a hurry. So anyway, I'll shut up.
No, thank you, Abram. That was wonderful. And those narratives are enriching. Thank you all for sharing them. I'm sorry for rushing past that, an oversight on my part. All right, so to all of you, again, if you would please, when you ask a question, tell us your name, where, what program you're in, where you are in the program, and if you have a dissertation topic or an area of interest, let us know a little bit more about that. So what questions do you have for our panelists?
I'm actually going to hop in, even though I'm not a grad student. I know that's not fair, but it's relevant and a good question for you all. I'm Karen Skinner. I'm the academic coordinator in American Culture Studies, and I graduated. I have a PhD, and I wrote about a lot of popular things, but never published them. My master's thesis was on Twilight as a Mormon allegory, and I never got to publish that. But my question that I'm wondering if other people feel this way is, many of you write about pop culture. Especially if you're writing about TV shows, like Phil, you write a lot about TV, a lot of you write about pop culture. It feels like pop culture moves so fast. At what point can you keep talking about it? So for example, not that I'm going to do this, but could I pitch something about Game of Thrones, or are we really over that? Is Twilight really done? I saw Helen Peterson just recently wrote something about the Little House on the Prairie books, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. We haven't talked about that in a while. And if people don't know Helen Peterson, look her up because she's someone that pivoted to public writing with BuzzFeed, which was a big deal when I was in grad school. But what do you guys think about how quickly pop culture moves and TV shows and stuff? Phil?
Okay, fine. It varies. I mean, you know, I guess the cycle was just up on Little House on the Prairie. It became relevant again. I think this is another one of those things. It depends on the venue. Like I'm adamant with saying that essentially there's like a year clock on a television show for me to accept a pitch on it at LARB. Timeliness is not a huge deal for us over there, or for me at least in the TV section. I think just generally because a lot of our writers don't get screeners automatically the way that you would if you were a staffer somewhere or cover TV really regularly. It tends to be, there's a gestation period after a show airs to A, see it, B, have an idea about it, and then C, come up with a pitch for it. So we, it's a little bit longer of a half-life at LARB. But when you're thinking about like, about Slate or BuzzFeed or, NewYorker.com or something like that, I think it's hard for me to tell with that stuff as someone who thinks about, pitching a lot. Obviously, there's like day of coverage or stuff that comes out the week a thing drops. And then sometimes a show or a movie or something has like a second wave. Like there was everybody wrote about Queen's Gambit when it came out. And then like 2 weeks later, there was just this tidal wave of more Queen's Gambit stuff. And like the discourse came alive again. But that doesn't happen to every show. Like the opposite example of that from recently is, people reviewed Small Axe, the Steve McQueen set of movies / TV show on Amazon, and there really hasn't been a second wave to me, or at least, or not as big as that Queen's Gambit wave. And so it's kind of just a lot of it is about how the discourse shifts. I think Twitter honestly dictates a lot of this, how much attention something is getting, how much conversation is going on around a text. So it really depends on the venue, and that's something you can tell, right? It's something you can find out if you just look at what they've published and when they've published it.
I have a lot to say about this. Well, maybe not too much, hopefully. I've just been thinking about it a lot because Joe Livingstone, who is a culture critic at the New Republic, they just published a thread of their favorite articles that they wrote over the year, and there were all these amazing, like kind of semi-obscure culture topics, some pop and some more high art kind of stuff. And I was like, man, we don't do any of this like anymore. Like I feel like Slate used to be a little more kind of like, oh, like we'll follow the passions of the writers, and we'll if you want to write about something that's past but that you feel like you can make a case for new relevance for the thing, then like sure, like we'll consider it. And I feel like maybe it's this year, like the pandemic has been super weird for culture coverage, as everyone can maybe guess, where it seemed like we're getting a lot more traction writing about the so-called like the water cooler shows, so like Tiger King and Queen's Gambit and all the ones that everyone is like trying to read everything that they can about. It seemed like much more prudent to kind of pour our resources into that stuff. And I don't know if it'll swing back. The pendulum might swing back the other way, and I might be able to start writing blog posts about children's books from the 1930s that I really like or whatever. But I will say about the Aunt Helen Peterson's piece about the Long Winter, I almost feel like stuff that's like way back, like the Long Winter, is like a little more saleable than something like Game of Thrones, like in some weird way. It's like it makes more sense to write about that stuff than to write about something that happened 5 years ago. I don't know, especially obviously if you can make a connection. Like I didn't read the edition of her newsletter that she wrote, but I think she was making a connection between that winter and our pandemic winter and everyone's feelings about it. So I don't think it's completely random. I mean, the same thing has been happening with sort of like writing about pandemic lit. Like I've written a number of pieces that are about stuff from the 20s and 30s that connects with, stuff about the flu that connects with now in different ways. So I mean, I think it's really just about the argument that can be made about the present day connections. And in some ways, like, I feel like there's always these like weird resurgences and random stuff from the 90s or or 2000s, where all of a sudden you're like, wait, why is everyone talking about that? And the reason they're talking about it is that someone smart had a good idea to write something interesting about it, and pitched it well and ended up executing it well. So, you know, in some ways it's like, I mean, I don't edit in culture, so I'm not as like hooked into that, but I sometimes feel like it's like, it must be hard to edit in culture because you're trying to, and like, it's good to sort of like maybe sometimes take a bet on some of these, like take a flyer on some of the ones that are a little bit like seem a little tangential or like off the map, and you sort of risk looking a little bit like you don't know what year it is. But if it works out, then it can be really good, because you get tired of reading about the Queen's Gambit and writing about the Queen's Gambit, I got to be honest, over and over again. So sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a rest from that.
I have a specific answer to that, and then some more general comments too. One is that I used to feel really bothered by what Phil is kind of calling the academic half-light at Avidly, which is that like there would be a show on and people would be really excited about it, and then like that would wane, and like 2 months later, here come all the academics like thrilled to share like, well, this connects to my research on like the rise of the sentimental novel. Like everyone's like been waiting this whole time to hear how, you know, like you can hear in my voice the irritation, right? Like the like, here's a popular thing, but let me tell you. And like, nobody's talking about that anymore. It's like, if you were at a party and you're like, whoa, did you, like, we're like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this thing that just happened now, right? Like, so pay attention to what we're talking about. So I used to really feel that, and that is still true. Like that, like it goes back to what Phil is saying about the conversation. You have to be tracking the venues and what conversation they're having. And you can't just like waltz in and be like, hey, did you see that football game from like 8 weeks ago? And people are like, yeah, but like there's been 7 football games since, you know, like you can't just do that. That said, the specific thing I have to say is that I personally have made a switch because my time is much more compressed now. And I'm in this mode of just feeling like timeliness is the patriarchy, and we should just all talk about whatever we have time for. Like I don't have time to watch Queen's Gambit when everybody else is. Like my dog is running, you know. So right now, as an editor, timeliness is less important to me. And one example of that is that just 2 days ago, I ran something about Schitt's Creek, which nobody is really talking about. And like everybody has written about, and there's, you know, like we all either we've watched it or we haven't, and I haven't yet, but I kind of know this. But I was just like, I really like this person, and she has just like this really sweet, smart account of it, and like it was great, you know, like she just, and I was like, I am here to make space for a close reading of 2 episodes of television that aired 4 years ago. Why not, right? Like, so I'm that am I frozen? No, I can't tell. So that's one thing that I have to say, and like that can be good. I guess the thing to say about Rebecca's point about the like the difference between Game of Thrones, for instance, and the Long Winter piece is that like conversations are a little bit like fashion. It's one thing to be just like slightly past a trend, and another thing to like go retro, right? Or go classic or go evergreen. And like, again, I feel like this comes back to the main point that I have to say about like, can you make it interesting to somebody, a real person right now? Can you connect it to something that they care about? And that they're not tired of, like per Rebecca's point about not being tired of the Queen's Gambit. Like I've gotten so many pitches about, well, this connects to the pandemic. And what I've kind of said is, if you can write it without using the word pandemic, I will be interested, but I don't want to hear that word ever, right? So those are some thoughts on the timeliness. But the main thing I would say is, like, again, you are a person in time. Your reader is a person in time. They probably don't have as much time as they wanted to. You as graduate students have more time than anyone else in the world. And you should use that to your advantage and be like slow and luxurious and leisurely. And I know it feels like you're at sea, but feel that as like a waterbed as much, like turn it into something that feels good as much as you can, because like having this slow time now will make you somebody into something later, where like I see a comment about, oh, here's somebody who happens to know a whole lot about Latinx representation. And so they can write something quick because they were careful and slow before. So you are in the careful and slow time and love it. Do whatever psychic work you have to do to turn that into joy, because it just gets worse. So yeah, and better, but
I have just following up really quickly, I have a very specific suggestion that is related to like at least for right now, the very contemporary media environment, which is that anniversaries can be useful for pitching, especially if you want to write about something that's older. Like The Ringer, I don't know if you read The Ringer, like half of what they do is based on anniversaries of things that happened in the 90s. And I don't say that derisively, it's just what happens. And I think that it's kind of leached out into, I know our friend Jane Hu has done this a number of times. I did it at Slate this year on a piece that I pitched on the 50th anniversary of Frog and Toad. Sometimes you might have something to say about something that's kind of older, and an easy way to kind of manufacture relevance is say like, hey, guess what? This is the 45th anniversary of this happening, right? And it won't always work, but it can help a little bit to try to frame, especially if you're writing about something that's considerably older.
Thank you all. I loved that Frog and Toad piece, Phil. I must say personally, it was wonderful. Okay, other questions from anyone else in the audience?
I wanted to ask actually a sort of a practical question. So I'm Thomas, I'm in the English department, a fourth year. I just finished my major fields exams, and I'm ABD now, which I seem to remember we talked about this in an English department meeting like last year or 2 years ago, where the suggestion was like to wait until this point to start doing this kind of writing, like wait till you're ABD and then you can do it. But I feel like a lot of people might be in this boat where you're like, I'm interested in doing this sort of writing and I want to do this sort of writing, but I have no idea like how to start. So I'm just curious, like practically, if I'm interested in it, like what should I do? What's like the steps to take? I mean, I know some of this is useful, like to read the pieces and the places you want to be published, but then like beyond that, what sorts of steps should we be taking? I don't want to call on people.
I suppose I could help you out with that, but I feel guilty about it too. How about Rebecca? She hasn't gone first on any topic, I don't think.
Hooray! It's kind of a weird time. Again, going back to the time and place where we are, because I feel like there used to be more kind of like not like kind of, well, just blogs, like classic blogs that used to exist a lot more, where you could pitch like, if you're talking about like the kind of like cultural criticism, that was like a perfect place to write kind of like a brief meditation with maybe a friendly editor as like a guest post on a like a para-academic blog, I guess you can think of it. But maybe you guys, like, I don't know whether other panelists have a better sense of what the world of that is like right now. I feel like Twitter kind of killed that world a little bit. And like, I feel like that's what I would have used to, that's what I would have recommended at some point. You don't necessarily get paid for it, but like for example, when I went to grad school, I used to write for Austinist, which was like the Austin version of all the IST sites, like Gothamist and all that kind of network. I think all of which I think is dead now. But it was like a city level culture blog, basically. Where I would meet with those people who were none of the other of whom were grad students, and like just like kind of like build a network of like people who were doing culture writing outside of the academy and write again for no pay and not really with very high stakes, but it sort of just like got me in the flow of it a little bit. I believe I was ABD before I started doing that. But again, it was a little different because I went into grad school thinking that I would freelance through grad school because I had freelanced before grad school, and it sort of ended up being a lie that I told myself. But that kind of like level of blog was a good way in. Panelists, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I don't know. I mean, I was wondering if, I mean, Rebecca, you're totally right about Facebook and Twitter killed the blogosphere, which was so good to us. And then I don't know what killed the wonderland that was the weird internet of the early aughts. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like, you know, like this goes back to my like how to turn a disaster into a possibility. Like, I don't know, like start a newsletter, like why not? Like maybe you write 3, but if you do it and you link it on your stuff and like you get to see if like what do people email you back about? Like I just feel like it's so hard to learn how to connect to a reader when you don't have any. So I do feel like whatever provisional, or like, I don't know, like you all like start a WordPress site and like can't hurt, you know, like, or it can take a lot of your energy away from longer term projects. And you do have to learn how to do that, but you have to learn how to do that in your life anyway. So I don't think that's necessarily, I mean, you should talk to your advisors. You know, seriously, RIP. So, but I do feel like, you know, like, try and find some little low-hanging fruit way to put it out there. And I don't know how to do it besides that. The only other thing to say is to like be on Twitter and practice your sentences. But I do feel like right now Twitter is really a hellscape. And so I don't know that I can recommend that in good. I don't know, like I will say genuinely for myself, this is something that I'm totally struggling with too. I do feel like if you're not there, like that is the party. It's just a terrible party right now. It's like everyone's so dour. And so I'm trying to balance, like trying to like kind of come back into the world with like, this is bad for, I would rather make cookies. So I do think it's hard, but so like, I don't know, like make another little party, and it's not very exciting, but I guess one question is like, what are you trying to get out of it? And what can you do to make that return possible? But yeah, Laura or Phil might have thoughts too.
Well, Phil, go ahead.
I mean, I don't really have a ton to add. I think the thing I would just say is the good, you know, lots of things are bad if you're trying to start this now, just because there are so many fewer outlets, and even just talking about like right now this month or this season, like a lot of outlets have contracted their freelance budgets, you know, temporarily or forever, and so it's hard. But I think the good thing about it is that there are a lot of, and not to awaken the Twitter kraken, but there are like para-academic outlets that are a pretty easy on-ramp for people in your collective situation as graduate students, right? You know, editors like me at LARB, or people at The Point, or people at The Drift is a new one that we know some people who work at. I don't know how easy it is to pitch public books, but like those types of places are going to be like ready for you where you're at. And so if I was in this situation, I think the thing I would do, aside from like starting a Substack that I send to 15 of my friends, is just work on a pitch, you know, work on a pitch and send it to somebody, and see where that goes.
Yeah, and so I'm a first year in English literature PhD, and thank you all for attending and for all of your insight. I would just say, so Thomas, to directly like answer your question, one of the things that I did was, and it's not like anything superhuman, I swear, I went to the Cincinnati Art Museum, I looked at a Van Gogh painting there. I looked at their blog online and I asked them, I was like, do you take guest contributions to your blog? And if so, here's an idea. And they were overjoyed. So another avenue is maybe looking at already established blogs for people who are very overworked and underpaid and underappreciated, and seeing how you can help them fill a need. And so it's a very simple little thing. It's obviously not going to have the readership of The Atlantic, but that's sort of a way to sort of channel. I mean, I'm in Cincinnati, so it's more of a local connection, but something like that, seeing what blogs are established, whether it's, you know, a museum or something that you're passionate about, and going at it for that angle too.
Thank you all. I was wondering if we could connect this to the economics question that we referenced earlier. How much free writing is too much free writing? Where's the line that you draw? I need to be paid for this, the number of hours I'm putting in. What's the balance between I love this topic and I want to write about it and I'll write about it for free, I don't care, and yeah, I need to get some income from this pursuit? Sarah, can you lead us off?
Do you have to pay for childcare is the question? So.
Yeah, I will say that I just think it's good to ask. I run, like, I don't pay it Avidly. I wish I did. I am not paid for Avidly at all. Although, like, I was really thinking about that, like, or rather the benefit I get from it is also exposure, which is right. Like, so I'm doing this for you because I started this thing. So I've like edited all these like 600 pieces. And so I can, be here, whatever it is. But really ask, and it doesn't hurt. That personal exchange of like, what's the cost benefit for you is very personal. I think Rebecca's point about childcare is really great. Like there's not a clear line in the sand. I don't think I have a clear line in the sand, except that I would say always ask, and especially if you're a woman, like really ask for more. A piece of advice I got once was like, don't offer to do it for less, offer to do less. And I think like that is like that's from a friend of mine who runs her own business. It's like if somebody was like, oh, can you do this thing for us for a reduced price? She's like, no, but I will do a less thing for you for the amount that you can spend. And I felt like that was if you're like, everyone is struggling, and that doesn't mean that you should put your time into things that don't give you money. I don't know. I mean, it's a real conversation right this week. And so I would be interested in, yeah. And it's a recurring conversation in this topic. So.
Any insights for us, Phil?
Oh, I mean, I would amplify the ask. I know, there are some publications that literally won't pay you unless you ask, but they will pay you if you do ask. And it can be that simple. Like, it's not, what Sarah's saying isn't necessarily always like a hard-nosed negotiation, although it could be, or if you want more, whatever. But I think especially the kinds of spaces that we're talking about, the para-academic type places, they might have budgets to pay freelancers, but they might not be like super eager to exercise those budgets unless they have to. So do ask. But also, amplifying what Sarah's saying of just, it's about, a personal decision, right? If you're looking to just like, you have some dissertation research, you'd like to get out there, you'd like to start a conversation with other peers and on Twitter or at conferences, and it doesn't, you're not looking for this to be like a sustaining, aspect of your, if you're seeing it kind of as an adjunct of your academic writing, then, then that's that. And if somebody pays you, that's great. And if they don't, then they don't. But I think that, there are enough places out there that you should ask, and it's not unfair to prioritize it as an element of where you're pitching and what you want to do with it ultimately.
I 100% agree with what Sarah's saying in the chat. This is a personal decision within a structural problem. So this is obviously the subject of so much spilled ink among freelancers. And one thing that I've found, I'm not freelancing very much right now, but one thing that I found really interesting is that there's an organization called Study Hall. And I put their Twitter in here. I think you have to pay to get the newsletter, but I think it's like $2 a month or something. But they have a weekly newsletter that has pitching opportunities in it. It also has journalism job opportunities, none of which I really take advantage of or use, but I am very interested to see, because one of the things that they're very into fairness in freelancing and fairness in rates and stuff. So for their audience, like one of the I guess standards that they hold themselves to is that when they put in an opportunity for pitching, like a call for pitches, they will always have the amount of money that it's going to be, like they make the outlets say. So it kind of puts some transparency into a situation that, as Phil was saying, very much lacks transparency. I mean, like, I hate to say it, but like Slate does that to people too. Like we'll like basically sort of like be strategically unclear about how much money is going to be spent on things unless it's asked for, which is like, whatever. I understand why it works that way, but it makes it so that the people who aren't afraid to ask make more money, which is kind of mean. Or like well, it's patriarchy also, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. So whatever, I'm doing what I can, whatever. I will say about the study hall newsletter, like one thing that's been really helpful for me in it also is just to see what even outlets there are. Like there's so many outlets in there that pay like, you know, okay, like not depending on what you would pitch for them, that I've never heard of. So, you know, there's always, and I've like spent my entire life on the internet. So there's always more stuff to know about that will pay. So I would say get a sense of what is out there that pays. And this is one thing that Twitter is good for, is like the occasional freelancer discourse that pops up around who is paying what. Phil is recommending, yeah, writers of color Twitter feed also, same thing. But also just like it'll just pop up every once in a while randomly. Someone will say, I wrote this for this place and they didn't pay me, or like they didn't pay me enough, or you know, they made me do this much work, whatever. It's like a way to sort of have an eye into the conversation of it. I don't, it really is gonna, like, I feel like when I first started freelancing, I was willing to do anything. Like, I just was like, just publish me, it's fine. Like, I just want to feel like I'm being edited and my ideas are getting developed. And then I feel like there was a tipping point where I was like, no, I need to not do this. So it is sort of like you'll know it when you see it kind of thing for some people. But then there's also the argument that nobody should write for free because it depresses rates for everybody, which is like a whole other possibly like political conversation. But maybe we should have that or not have that, I don't know. But I do think that it's going to be like pretty clear to you if you do start writing things that are taking up time and you're like annoyed to be taking that time and getting paid what you're getting paid for it, then you're going to realize that this has to stop.
That was really insightful. Thank you all. I was thinking about this a lot recently because defector.com just did a whole blog post about what the rates are, what they're going to pay. And they, of course, have a very defined labor stance because of what they all went through with the Gizmodo group and all the hedge funds and all that. Okay, other questions from people out there that are curious.
I had one other thing I'm going to dive in and say just one more thing that I wanted, that it comes back to, in a sense, what Laura was saying about, I saw this one painting and I'm writing for the blog of this place that has the painting, and I love that. And just as somebody who has read a lot of pitches from WashU graduate students, the thing that I wanted to collectively give a piece of advice is that, like, be specific. You all now have a huge breadth of knowledge, and you can't write your like 1,200 word Avidly essay about your dissertation topic, right? Like, everything you know comes to you and will shape the way that you craft those sentences. But just like, allow yourself to talk about this specific thing, whatever it is, right? And this will vary from venue to venue, but I think in a way this complements what Rebecca was saying about, don't be so general, right? Like really go to the point. And another thing that I would say about that is, look at the submission pages of the places that you're sending it to, which I think most of you have done for me, I know, because you've commented on this. But the thing that I notice the most, and that, I teach freshman comp, and I teach writing seminars for faculty. And the thing that I say over and over again is pay attention to what the subject of your sentence is and the verb in your sentence. Like, that's it. Like, put the most important noun in the subject position and then give that noun something interesting to do, right? Like that prose style, that way of inhabiting an active style is the single most important thing I can say to you, because partly it will help you in the process of writing think more, right? Like, what noun is it that I'm saying is doing something, and what are they doing? If they just are, like, that's great. Queen's Gambit is. I'm like, yeah, it is. It definitely is, you know, like, but Queen Gambit opens something. Oh, it opened, right? You know, like whatever. Just like really try and think about that. And when you, and I think that these two pieces of advice fit together, right? Because then it's not like ideas, like really, I can't picture ideas. Like, is it anxiety, right? No, but it's like a person from the 1930s, like, who is she, right? So like really try and be precise and have like concrete nouns that, and that process of picking the nouns will help you narrow in. And I don't know if this is the same advice that every editor would give you. I can only speak for myself, but that's the way to figure out exactly what you have to say and why it speaks to a moment. So that helps me write better. So we'll say that.
Thank you. Also,
by the way, can I jump in real quick? Just with something I think is obvious and assumed here, but needs stating because it's the opposite of academic writing, which is that you pitch first and write second. In academic writing, you write first and then you try to submit it somewhere. But don't do all the labor of writing the piece and then start pitching it around. Pitch first, write second. So come up with the idea and the paragraph that's about the idea and try to sell it first or find a place for it first and then write the piece. But you don't want to do all the labor if it's never gonna go anywhere.
Yeah, I second that 100%. I will get pitches that are just, here's my piece with the attachment, and I just never open the attachment. So,
oh yeah, that's the other thing. That's the other rule of thumb, right? Never send an attachment. No one opens an attachment.
It's okay if you have it written already, but you still have to write a pitch. Otherwise, the editor is just like, oh, I can't.
thank you for that, Abram. Some of us.
Okay, but I just want to throw out, like, I had this argument with Sarah Blackwood who all the time, like, what I don't want to do is scroll down ever. Like scrolling down, like that's the thing that's the worst for me. So like I will click on it, so it will like pop up and I'll glance at it, like if the pitch is interesting, but I like scrolling just makes me crazy. I hate that. So I like do both. Don't assume that somebody will read your attachment. You definitely have to have the pitch. And I just want to say, because I get a lot of pitches, and I will use word from Laura, rural Iowa. I'm so blessed to receive a lot of pitches from grad students. It's really great. But like, this is why like the language in the pitch has to really matter. And it's such a question for me, like, can you write? How much work am I going to be putting into helping you structure a paragraph? And it's not to say that I won't do it for people who are, I do it. That's like my pleasure in this project. But if you don't have clips for someplace else, I really want to know just like how much work this is going to be for me. And so it, like taking a gamble on somebody who's never written anything. I have no example of what their writing looks like, and they're sending me some pitch and I'm like, you know, like, because that could be like a whole day or like multiple days and a lot of emails of my life, and I don't have a lot of that. So when you are starting out, you really do have to be able to show the editor what your writing is like. And eventually you won't have to, you know, now I just like text Phil, but like we have a really long established working relationship. So we have a lot of trust, and you have to establish trust somehow. So what is the thing that the editor can trust in? So.
Phil, you unmuted as if you were going to say something and then remuted.
No, I was just saying, it is absolutely true. I know exactly what is coming when Sarah texts me.
5,000 words with a mention of Virginia Woolf. And you'd be like, huh, Sarah, what if it were 3,000? Yeah.
I've never said that to you. No, I've never said that to you. Other people.
That's true. He never has. This is
No
why I'm always
words on
picking Phil. Whereas I spend a lot of time, like this week, I've responded to 3 people who are like, I imagine it will be 2,000 to 3,000 words. And I was like, yeah, I will read 1,200 words. So, yeah. Anyway, that's what it is.
We have about 15 minutes left. So if anyone else has a question, now is the time.
Just on Sarah's last point, I think it's worth, for those of us who write academic essays as well and have a different sense of what counts as long and what counts as short, just thinking about what is long form online. Probably anything over 1,200 words, right, starts to feel long form. Or I'm sort of curious, what your ideal length for, this is where you're reading the places where you want to pitch and figuring out how long the pieces generally are comes in handy. By the way, if you never read stuff online, you probably shouldn't be interested in this conversation. So if that sounds laborious to you, like, oh, I've got to go read Slate now to figure out what's in there, then you probably shouldn't be pitching Slate. It should be a pleasure to go online and read these things. But anyway,
we really hope so. We hope it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
I have something to say about this, which goes back to, I think, Thomas's question about how to get started. I discover I have a piece of advice, which is think about something that you read that you liked and copy it and paste it into a Word doc, see how many word pages it is, and look exactly at their structure. What's their nut graph? Do they have a thesis? How many paragraphs? How many sentences in a paragraph? And that imitation, these are genres, and you need to learn how to fit within them because it helps your reader. So find things that you like and pay attention to how they're constructed. And because if you are in this program, if you're in this meeting, you're probably pretty good at absorbing that at some level, but you can, that's the skill that gets us here, right? Is absorbing patterns and genres. But you can be more self-conscious about that. A small example of this is when I was trying to learn how to write with the cool Dear TV kids, I was like, okay, I have to have a really funny sentence within the first 5 sentences. Otherwise, no, it's because it's TV writing and you're just I'm like, shit, I'm not as funny as Phil. But writing with Phil made me funnier. So because I had to do that. So anyway, so really learn the structures and look at the different venues, see how long they are. So that's one piece of advice.
Sorry, Phil.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to chime in and say I really love what Sarah just said because and I private messaged Rebecca about this already. I actually used some of her Slate articles in my class this semester to teach my students how to write things about current affairs in historical context. And we analyzed it. And I had no idea, right, that I would meet you today. But that's exactly what I was doing with the students to try to teach them how to think about writing in this mode. Let's read a bunch of things like that and think about how they did that. So anyway, that's so funny. Now my dog wants to say hello. Thanks
so much. Your dog is adorable. Thank you.
Your examples were perfect.
I was just going to say, perhaps the panelists have some recommendations for particularly effective writers, the kinds of writers that maybe you don't do that with now because you are yourself established writers, but if you were going to engage in this practice, ones that you would pick out as particularly effective ones to emulate or to learn about.
So I was about to say this anyway, and she's come up already today, but Helen Peterson is, I think now her stuff is pretty far afield from what she was doing when she first started pitching in grad school. But if you go back, and then it's all out there, if you go back to the stuff she was writing at the Hairpin and the things she was writing, even just for I think she wrote for Flow TV a little bit, like some of those grad school blogs, Antenna maybe, I think she might've been in there a little bit. Sure, I was reading her before I knew her, and then I met her, and she's gone through this long process of adapting from being a PhD student who blogs, to being someone who's pitching out to places like, you know, the kinds of things that we're talking about, to somebody who's then a staff writer, to now somebody who is you know, who has this Substack. And the reason that I want to point to her isn't just because she's gone through this process and you can sort of find yourself at various points in that evolution, but because she is so, and writing with her made this extremely clear if it wasn't already, she's so precise about the form of what she's doing. She thinks a lot about venue and style and approach and point of view with relation to how she uses her expertise or uses her research or whatever. I started a Substack a little while ago, and I thought I'm going to read some other Substacks that I like, and I went through Annie's, and I started like doing word counts, and it was just, they're all exactly the same word count. They all have exactly the same structure. And it's not immediately obvious that this would be true, but she's somebody who I think has always had a very good sense, or at least a very good sense, an ethic for finding out this information, to like adapt what she can do at a particular career stage to the venue. So I would, looking into those early Helen Peterson pieces from Hairpin, and when she first started at BuzzFeed too, I think could be useful depending on where you're pitching and what you want to do.
I'll say another small thing about her, which is that she is just an incredibly solid human being. And like, I have a lot of professional jealousy, as I think we all do. I get red ragey about people, and I just can never be that way about her, because she is really like clear. She does what she commits, and she like shares the wealth. And so she's a model. I mean, like, we've had really different paths and different priorities in a lot of different ways, but she's a real, it's just like good to know that like people like to lift her up because she's just solid. So I just will throw that out there. Like, remember, like, look to the places that build real networks that are meaningful, and like be the light you want to see in the world. Like, but I do think like that matters. So like, yeah. Anyway, rural Iowa.
And Helen Peterson was in my dissertation writing group. I'd like everybody to know. She was at grad school with me at the same time. She is great. I want to mention a few other people who I am always jealous of the stuff that they read. Lauren Michelle Jackson, who's an assistant professor of English at Northwestern, is a contributing writer at The New Yorker, and everything she writes is awesome. I had a colleague named Katie Waldman who got poached by The New Yorker also. She writes about books and she writes reviews, but she also writes kind of like big synthetic essays that are always really great. And I always like the way she's not a former academic, but I always am jealous of many things that she writes. And then during the pandemic, Ed Yong at The Atlantic, everything that he writes is like amazingly synthetic and wonderful and clear and awesome. And is the kind of stuff that I want to copy paste into a Word document and find out how he wrote it. So it's science journalism, which isn't, I don't know, maybe someone here is planning to go into that, but it's sort of a little bit further afield from what we might write. But in terms of structure and approach, it's always really great.
I'll mention one other person who I like, who's a little bit off the beaten path here. I'm just putting her Twitter feed in, but is Sarah Mesle. She's not an academic at all. She is one of my favorite writers. I love everything she writes. I just read it aloud to people from my phone. She is fearless. It is incredibly unusual to find a woman culture writer who is so unafraid of people disliking her, whether she's writing about controversial things like abortion or seemingly like, who cares about The English Patient, a movie that came out 30 years ago. But she like set the internet aflame for like 2 weeks because she was like, this movie was incredibly shitty. And like, then like but then like the like inferno of feeling that she is able to generate by her lack of compliance with taste standards is just like so gem-like to me. And she is an inspiration. Also, she has very cute dogs. So I really like her, but she makes people furious. And so it's like and like sometimes me too. I just, yeah.
All right. Well, we're basically out of time. Final call for anyone to say something. I just want to give anyone who wants to an opportunity to chime in. All right. Well, I hope you learned as much at this event as I did. Thank you, Abram, for thinking it up, and thank you to our panelists for being here. I'm sure you're all following the chat, but if you aren't, get in there. The links are amazing. There's a lot to be learned from there. So thank you again for joining us, panelists. This has been lovely. Just remembering the early aughts internet has been a pleasure. That alone has made my day. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay well, and let's all hope that the internet comes back to being a more equitable and paying and lovely place in the future.
See you all. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.